Dog barks desperately at pregnant woman. But when police realized the truth, it was too late. The cold morning wind swept through the cracked pavement outside Red Hollow Airport, a narrow regional terminal buried somewhere between outdated radar towers and the low hum of distant highways. Inside, the overhead lights flickered slightly, either from age or neglect, and the hum of fluorescent bulbs blended with the murmurs of weary travelers dragging suitcases and sipping lukewarm coffee from paper cups. Thatcher Maloon, nearing 50 and worn at the edges from decades of service, stood beside his canine partner Bishop near the security checkpoint. Bishop sat perfectly still, alert but relaxed, his black-tan fur glinting under the overhead light. A dog like Bishop didn't bark unless something demanded attention, and that was exactly what made what happened next so strange. One moment, it was routine. Thatcher had just waved through a pair of retirees arguing over bag weight when Bishop's ears shot up, body tensing like drawn wire. A woman was approaching the checkpoint. She was pregnant, clearly, and alone, mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Her coat was long, navy, expensive but understated, and her black sunglasses stayed on even as she approached the shaded terminal. Her pace was calm, but there was something off. Not feared, no rushing, no hesitation. She was composed, too composed, as though rehearsed. But Bishop's reaction wasn't to her movements. The dog stood, took one step forward, and barked. Not loud and aggressive, not the way he would with a threat. It was urgent, direct. A bark that said, "Look here, now." Marlo Ashford stopped in her tracks, and then something flickered in her expression. Not surprise, not panic, but something eerily close to recognition. She looked at Bishop, not Thatcher, not the guards flanking the scanner, and her hand, resting gently over the curve of her belly, curled slightly, her lips parted as if to say something. She didn't get the chance. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she crumpled silently to the floor, her coat fanning out around her like spilled ink. The air changed. People nearby turned, startled, but didn't rush in. Bishop was already at her side, sniffing, circling once. Thatcher motioned to the others to hold back as he dropped to a knee. "Ma'am, are you—" She wasn't unconscious. Her eyes fluttered open, but with confusion swimming in them, as if she didn't recognize where she was. Beside her lay two brown paper bags. From one spilled a scatter of pill bottles and a medical folder. From the other, oddly, tumbled a single envelope marked "Sorry" in looping cursive, and a silver chain, the unmistakable dull shine of a military dog tag. Thatcher's chest tightened before he even touched it. When he did, his breath froze. Hollis Rear, a name he hadn't seen, hadn't spoken aloud in 21 years. His hand closed around it. The chill had nothing to do with the air. That evening, with Marlo stable and in a private holding room monitored by airport medical, Thatcher sat in the dim security office with the envelope between his fingers. Bishop paced nearby. He hadn't barked again, not once, but he stayed uncomfortably close to the door, like he was guarding something unseen. Thatcher opened the envelope slowly, the paper soft and faded at the edges, like it had been handled too many times. The letter inside was handwritten. No dates, no location, just lines that read, "If you're reading this, it means I failed to keep my promise. Some ghosts don't haunt, they guide." Thatcher read it twice. Then again. Hollis had written about a woman named Lena, a translator from Kandahar. Not just any translator, but a civilian brought into a classified program called Project Helix. A program that didn't just train people, it rewrote them. Memories, cognition, emotion. Lena had been pregnant when Hollis disappeared. And the child, it seemed, had survived. The child was Marlo. Thatcher leaned back in his chair, the letter shaking slightly in his fingers. What the hell had Hollis been involved in? Why hadn't he said anything in the last deployment? Why had he trusted Thatcher with so little, and yet now, after death? With everything, Bishop gave a soft whimper. Not for attention, but with unease. He pawed at the floor, then suddenly leapt to the desk. Before Thatcher could stop him, the dog's claw dragged across the paper, and then something strange happened. New writing appeared. A message in faded ink, almost invisible before, began to glow faintly. Thatcher stared. "The satchel. You gave it to Langley. You thought it was standard protocol. It wasn't. It was the kill order. I wasn't supposed to come home. Thatcher blinked. The weight of it pressed down on him with unbearable force. 20 years ago, a simple handoff, one he'd questioned briefly, but never challenged, one that got his best friend killed. He had lived with guilt. Yes, but never with certainty. Now he had both. He sat in stunned silence, guilt burning behind his eyes. A knock interrupted him. Cassandra Nguyen, a junior intel analyst from the federal offices, stepped in. "We've got something," she said, her eyes sharp but unsure. "You need to see this, on the screen in the medical monitoring room." Marlo was sitting up. She was speaking, only there was no microphone on. But the motion detection flagged her lips, and Cassandra had run lip-reading software. It translated one phrase, repeated several times. "I remember the fire, I remember their names." Then another line. "They're in me. All of them. Who's them?" Cassandra asked. Thatcher's voice cracked. Helix. They pulled surveillance of Marlo's apartment, her records, her searches. What they found painted a terrifying picture. Marlo had no birth records before 2002, no school until 2008. Her mother had died under mysterious circumstances, declared a suicide. But the journal found in her bag told a different story. Lena knew she was being watched. She knew Marlo had memories she shouldn't. Names of soldiers, pain from torture, procedures done to people long dead. She didn't understand why, but she feared what it meant. Marlo, it seemed, didn't just inherit trauma. She carried it, literally, through something implanted or passed down. She was reliving not just her mother's memories, but those of others. Dozens, possibly hundreds. Cassandra sat down, pale. She's not just remembering things, she's storing them. Thatcher looked at her. A living archive. The phrase stuck. Cassandra nodded grimly. "We've seen references. There was talk about cognitive imprinting, passing experiential data through cellular memory. It wasn't theoretical." Bishop barked once, sharp. "Urgent." Cassandra blinked. "What is it?" But Thatcher already knew. He turned back to the letter. Beneath the final line, there was one more phrase, this time in tiny block capitals. "If they find her, they will not kill her. They will raise the child as property." Suddenly, the urgency made sense. This wasn't about eliminating threats. It was about possession somewhere. Someone wanted to control the next generation of Helix, and Marlo's unborn child might be the most important piece in a buried government experiment no one wanted exposed. Cassandra whispered, "There's more. A group Rayon. They're not officially listed anymore, but they never really dissolved. What do they want? Silence, control, and whatever that child is." Outside the airport, the wind picked up again. A storm was coming. Inside the security office, Thatcher sat back, fists clenched, the weight of 2 decades crashing into the present. Bishop moved beside him, resting his head against Thatcher's leg like a memory refusing to fade. Marlo was asleep now, but the world around her had just awakened, and whatever she was carrying inside her womb and inside her mind was not hers alone anymore. It belonged to history, and history wanted her silenced. But this time, Thatcher wasn't going to be part of the handoff. This time, he would protect the ghost. Marlo Ashford opened her eyes slowly. Not from sleep, but from a state that felt like drowning in memories that weren't hers. The fluorescent lights above cast a sterile, artificial glow across the ceiling tiles, and the faint hum of electronics pulsed in the background like a heartbeat out of sync. She didn't know what time it was. She didn't know how long she had been unconscious. But she knew somehow instinctively that the man outside the door had read the letter. Her father's letter. She could feel it like gravity. Her hand moved to her stomach automatically, palm resting over the slight curve. The baby had kicked earlier, not a hard kick, more like a whisper from the inside, like it too was waking up. Remembering something it never lived. She wasn't afraid, not in the normal way. She was used to being watched, used to the vague flicker of surveillance cameras catching her in grocery stores or when she passed through intersections. But this felt different. It wasn't about her. It was about what she carried, not just the child, but the weight, the archive of people who no longer existed. She didn't understand how she knew their names, their languages, their pain, but she did. And it was becoming harder to separate her own childhood from theirs. Some nights she dreamed of mountains in Afghanistan, though she'd never left the States. Other times she felt pain in her shoulder from a bullet wound that didn't exist. Yep, once. She screamed in Russian during sleep and woke up crying for a man named Yuri, whose face she couldn't describe but whose love she still felt in her bones. She didn't know if she was losing her mind or becoming someone else entirely. She sat up slowly, legs swinging over the side of the cot, bare feet brushing the cold tile. The security room was clean, almost too clean. A tray of food sat on the table across the room untouched. Her mouth was dry, but she didn't move. Not until the door opened. Thatcher entered, followed closely by Bishop. The dog looked at her the way no human ever had. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with something closer to understanding. His head tilted slightly, eyes sharp but calm. She whispered, "You remember him, don't you?" Thatcher paused. "Who, my father?" "Hollis." He nodded once, slowly. "Yeah, I did." She looked away. He died thinking he'd made a difference. But he didn't. They used him, just like they used her. Just like they're going to use me. Thatcher sat on the edge of the chair across from her. "That doesn't have to happen." "It already is," she said, her voice low. "You think this child is just a baby. It's not. I don't know how, but it remembers too. It knows when I'm scared. It reacts when I recall things I shouldn't know. It's like—" She stopped, catching her breath, like it's already a person. Bishop let out a low, almost sympathetic whine. Marlo reached out, her fingers brushing the fur of his head, and for a moment her whole body relaxed. She closed her eyes. "When I was 7, she whispered, "I had a dream of a desert. There were helicopters, dust in the air, men shouting in Arabic. I knew their words. I saw their uniforms. I felt my hands shaking on a trigger I'd never held. When I told my mother, she cried, not because she didn't believe me, but because she did." Thatcher swallowed hard. "Helix did that, I don't know. I think it started with her. I think something about what they did to Lena shifted something. She passed it to me, not just in DNA, but in memories, in trauma, in identity. She wasn't supposed to remember either, but she did, and she gave that to me." Thatcher reached into his coat and slid the letter across the table. Marlo didn't touch it, she just stared at it, the corner curling slightly upward like it wanted to speak. "He loved you," Thatcher said. "He tried to protect you. He died because someone handed off the wrong package." The words were heavy, cold, not accusatory, just fact. Thatcher winced but nodded. "I know." Silence hung between them. Then Marlo leaned forward. "Have you heard of Rayon?" "Yes. They've been following me for months. They don't want me dead. They want what I carry. The baby, me, the data, the memory, I don't even know what to call it. They think it's worth something. Or dangerous. Probably both." Thatcher nodded slowly. "We need to move you. Somewhere safe." "There's nowhere safe. They have people everywhere. Agencies, front companies, even private clinics. You think they stopped after 9/11? No. They went deeper, quieter, better funded. What they're building now, it makes Helix look like a pilot program." "How do you know that?" "Because I dream about it," she whispered. "Because sometimes I wake up with their thoughts in my head. Not just victims, the scientists, the men who ran the tests. I see their white coats. I hear the hum of labs buried under mountains. I smell formaldehyde. It's in me, all of it." Thatcher rubbed his hands together, leaning back in the chair. "You're not crazy. That's the terrifying part," she said with a sad laugh. "I know I'm not." The door opened again, and Cassandra stepped in, holding a small tablet. We picked up chatter. Something scrambled on a federal line. Mention of an asset under pregnant designation. "They're mobilizing. How long do we have?" Thatcher asked. "Maybe 24 hours. Maybe less." Marlo stood. "Then we go now." Thatcher looked at her belly, then at her eyes. "You sure you're up for it?" "I've been up for it since before I was born," she said. They moved quickly. Cassandra pulled a black duffel bag from the cabinet and slid it across the table. Inside were burner phones, forged IDs, and a small encrypted drive marked MK Helix 13. Marlo stared at it. That was her file number. "My mother," Cassandra nodded. "It's what we recovered from the Phoenix Drop Zone archive. It's not much, but it's enough to prove Helix existed." Bishop barked once, sharp and directional, as if he knew the time for talk had ended. They exited the security office through the maintenance hallway, avoiding the cameras. Cassandra wiped the surveillance logs, and within minutes they were in a gray SUV pulling away from the terminal, taillights vanishing into the early dusk. Marlo sat in the back, one hand over her belly, the other gripping the handle tight. Thatcher drove, eyes fixed ahead, while Bishop sat beside him like a sentinel. "Where are we going?" she asked. "North," he said. "Into the mountains. To someone who used to know Helix better than anyone still alive, who Dr. Micah Lenning. He helped design the memory imprinting protocols, faked his death in '08, lives off-grid now. If anyone can help you, it's him. And what if he won't? Then we keep running." The SUV climbed steadily as the highway gave way to winding forest roads. Snow dusted the trees in gentle layers, and the world grew quiet as they left the grid behind. No cell towers, no lights, just dark, winding isolation. Marlo stared out the window, her reflection looking back like a stranger. "Do you believe I'm still me?" she asked, after everything. Thatcher didn't answer immediately. "I believe you're more than one person," he said carefully, "but that doesn't make you less human. It makes you necessary." "For what?" "For remembering the truth, even when no one else will." The road stretched on, the trees whispered, and in her belly, the child shifted again, a flicker, a heartbeat, a spark of something old awakening again, something born of memory, and perhaps of revolution. The cabin was nearly invisible from the road, swallowed by pine and snow, perched against the edge of a frozen lake that mirrored the steel-gray sky. Thatcher's SUV rolled to a quiet stop, its tires crunching softly against packed snow as steam hissed from the engine. They had driven through the night without pause, stopping only once to refuel and change plates. Thatcher working with practiced efficiency while Cassandra wiped GPS traces from burner devices. Marlo had barely spoken since they left Red Hollow, her eyes drawn inward as if wrestling with voices only she could hear. Now, as Bishop leapt from the vehicle and began sniffing the perimeter, Marlo stepped into the cold with one hand cradling her belly and the other wrapped tightly around her coat. The air here felt different, not just colder, but thinner, sharper, as though the trees themselves had been holding their breath for years. The cabin looked abandoned at first glance, moss-covered shingles, dark windows, no signs of life. But Thatcher moved with certainty, following a narrow footpath only visible under the fresh dusting of snow. He stopped before the door and knocked twice, then once more in a strange pattern. 3 seconds passed, then 2 more. Nothing. Just as Cassandra stepped forward to ask if they had been followed or misled. The door creaked open from the inside with a low mechanical groan. A man stood in the shadows, not tall but lean, his frame wiry beneath a thick wool sweater and patched jeans. His beard was silver, face sunken with age but alert, and his eyes a cold, almost glassy blue betrayed no surprise at the visitors. His voice came low, steady. "I told you I never wanted contact again. And I told you ghosts don't wait forever," Thatcher replied. The man's gaze flicked to Bishop, then to Marlo, and finally to her belly. Something flickered behind his eyes, something that looked a lot like fear. He stepped aside without another word, and they entered. Inside was warmth, not comfort. A stove crackled at the far end, casting orange light over walls lined with books and diagrams and yellowed papers pinned like forensic evidence. Old photographs, some half-burned, peeked from the corners of a dusty corkboard. Cassandra moved silently to a chair by the window, her eyes scanning the perimeter through binoculars. Bishop curled near the hearth but remained alert, tail twitching. Marlo stood in the center of the room, watching the man who had not yet introduced himself. Finally, he spoke. "Micah Lenning, I assume that name still means something to you." "You created it," she said. "Helix, or at least the parts that worked. I created the framework," he admitted, settling into a rickety chair that creaked under his weight. "The vision was never mine. The memory grafting protocols, the cognitive overlays, that was pure government fantasy. But they needed scientists with no God and no fear. So they found us." "Why did you fake your death?" Cassandra asked from the shadows. "Because I saw what came after." He turned to Marlo. "Your mother, Lena. She was not the first civilian they tried. She was just the first to survive full emotional overlay without psychotic collapse. They should have stopped there, but they didn't. They used her as a seed, Marlo whispered, to pass it on. Micah looked at her long and hard. Yes, she became a vector, not just for memory but for resonance. Trauma echoes, you see, especially when replicated in the womb. Your brain was never your own, not entirely. You are a map of other people's ruins. And the child, Thatcher asked, what is it? Micah hesitated. Something new, perhaps something final. He stood and walked to the bookshelf, retrieving a battered binder with the Helix logo barely visible on the cover. They called it the Genesis node. The idea was simple. If memory could be mapped genetically, then a new subject gestated in a post-overlap vessel could theoretically inherit not just memory, but decision-making frameworks, skill conditioning, even language instinct. So they built a child out of ghosts, Marlo said, her voice tight. No, they built a prototype. You were that prototype, but you survived, which made them greedy. And now your child, he let the sentence die in the air. Cassandra stepped forward. Rayon is mobilizing. They know she's here. We intercepted chatter from a signal sweep outside Missoula. We have maybe 8 hours, max. Let them come, Micah said without fear. There's one more thing she needs to see before we run. He led them into a back room. This one darker, windowless. On one side stood a rusted metal table, its surface dented and stained. Above it, a single hanging light buzzed to life. On the wall were reels of tape, photos, blueprints, and most chilling dozens of names. Some crossed out, others circled in red. The missing, Micah said. These were the ones who didn't survive Helix. They weren't erased because they died. They were erased because they worked too well. Their memories were too real, too strong. The system collapsed under their identities. Marlo stepped closer to the wall. Her fingers hovered over one name. Yuri D. Smirnov. She gasped softly. I remember him. Of course you do, Micah said. You carry him. He loved someone once. You still feel that echo, not because you knew him, but because your mother did. Through him. This isn't inheritance, she whispered. It's haunting. It's both, Micah replied. And you have the only key left to unseal it. The drive, Thatcher said. The MK Helix 13 file. Micah nodded. It contains the bootstrap map of the original Helix dataset. With it, they could recreate what you are. But they won't need you anymore. They'll make more. Controlled. Obedient. Empty. Cassandra looked at Marlo. We have to destroy it. No, Marlo said. We have to release it. Thatcher blinked. What the world is to see it. Everything. What they did, what they built, what they buried. If we just burn it, they'll say it never existed. Micah hesitated, then reached behind a cabinet and pulled out a lead-lined lockbox. He placed it on the table and opened it slowly. Inside was a portable transmitter, old. Military issue, but operational. We broadcast to an open satellite window, he said. But once we start, they'll know exactly where we are. Then we give them a reason to come fast, Cassandra said. And we make it count. The plan was formed quickly. Out of necessity, Cassandra and Thatcher would monitor the perimeter. Bishop would track scent trails. Micah would handle the transmitter. And Marlo would make the decision when to press send. When she was ready, outside. The snow began to fall harder. In the distance, engines growled, and in her stomach. The child turned once more. Not afraid, not hiding, but ready to remember, ready to fight, ready to be born. The storm began just after dusk, soft at first, a shivering dance of snowflakes settling over the pines, then thickening into a swirling white curtain that devoured all sense of direction. Inside the cabin, heat pulsed from the cast iron stove, but it couldn't reach the cold seeping into Marlo's chest. Not from weather, but from what lay ahead. The transmitter sat silent on the table, a square of steel and blinking green readiness, waiting for her to choose. Across the room, Micah adjusted the old dial, syncing its frequency to an open military satellite window scheduled to cycle above them at 2:06 a.m. precisely. That window would last 12 minutes. No more. In 12 minutes. The entire Helix archive video footage, memory imprint protocols, death records, and replication plans would be sent into open digital space, a global leak designed to burn every lie built over 2 decades. If they succeeded, Cassandra loaded the last magazine into her sidearm, eyes flicking between the trees outside. Thermals are lighting up, she muttered. I count 4 heat signatures, 200 yards out. Drones too. Rayon's here early. How long until contact, Thatcher asked. Maybe an hour, she replied. They're circling, looking for signals. Bishop gave a low, warning growl from the door. He was pacing again, uneasy. He wasn't just a tracker, he was a sentinel of human intuition. And something had shifted. Marlo stood slowly, her fingers trailing along the wooden table as she moved toward the back room. Not the data room, the memory wall, the room Micah had shown her, where names were pinned like gravestones, and faces she had never seen had started to burn into her skull like branding irons. She stood before it again. She didn't need to read the names now. They were already inside her. The woman who bled to death on a table while being injected with memory threads from a dying Marine. The boy, 17, who screamed for 3 days because he didn't know which voice in his head was real. The scientist who recorded his own dreams onto reel tape, then slit his throat when they began playing back differently. She knew them, felt them, carried them. Her hand touched her belly. The baby hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Then a flutter. Faint. Still there. Still waiting. Still deciding. You don't have to do this. Micah's voice came from behind her. We can destroy the drive. We can disappear again. There are places still off-grid. And what happens the next time, she asked without turning? Another child, another experiment, another mother who doesn't know she's part of a machine. He said nothing, but she heard the creak of his bones as he sat down. I was part of it, you know, he said quietly. Not just the research, the application. I was in the room when they gave Lena her first overlay. She bled from the eyes. Her heart stopped for 92 seconds. I watched. I took notes. I told them to continue. Marlo closed her eyes. Why are you helping me now? Because I erased myself once, he said. And it didn't work. The voices never leave. They just wait. But you could end it, not just for them. For us. A crash shattered the silence. Wood splintered. A window exploded inward. Shards hailing across the cabin floor. Cassandra was already moving. Gun drawn. We're compromised, she shouted. They're here. Micah sprang from the chair, darting to the transmitter, fingers flying across knobs. I can start the buffer now. Give you 4 minutes to complete the sync. Start it, Thatcher shouted. Marlo, get to cover, but she didn't move. She was still in front of the wall, still staring at a photograph. Her own mother, younger, afraid, holding a clipboard in one hand, her other hand resting on her belly. The resemblance was horrifying. She reached out, touched the photo, and then moved. Cassandra fired twice, downing a shadowed figure in the tree line. Bishop lunged through the broken window, barking with surgical fury. Another Rayon agent tried to enter through the back, but Micah triggered the fail-safe, an electrified mesh door that slammed down with a mechanical screech. Thatcher grabbed the transmitter and forced it into Marlo's arms. Go now. The relay's open. Plug in the drive and send, they'll trace it. Let them, he barked. You're not here to hide anymore. She ran into the inner room, where the relay blinked. Red, yellow, almost ready. She jammed the drive into the slot and the machine screamed to life. Files loaded, voices streamed, video fed into the relay, grayscale footage of men convulsing under memory downloads. Women strapped to gurneys begging in 5 languages. Children learning combat strategy before they could read. She watched them all. The entire room echoed with the ghosts. Then the signal locked. The screen blinked green. Transmitted asked. She hovered her finger over the button. For a second, she saw herself, not in a mirror, but in memory. She was 3, watching her mother sing. Then 6, vomiting after waking from a dream of drowning in a tank. Then 11, cutting her arm because a voice told her to feel something real. Then 16, running from the first government agent who told her she was not what she thought, and now pregnant, a vessel, a witness. A weapon. She pressed the button. The relay screamed. The transmitter spat energy into the dark sky, and thousands of files exploded upward in packets of unsilenceable truth. Outside, Rayon agents shouted. A helicopter roared overhead. Gunfire erupted. Micah screamed as a bullet tore through his shoulder, but he kept the power flow stable with his other hand. Cassandra dropped to one knee, covering the window as Thatcher dragged Micah to the ground. Bishop launched at the feet of an incoming figure and didn't stop moving. The world became thunder, but Marlo was still inside the relay room, staring at the final message blinking on screen. Transmission complete. Under it, one last command. Repeat. She hit no. She pulled the drive free. Smoke filled the hallway. Rayon had entered. Cassandra was down, wounded. Micah crawled to the wall and hit the detonation trigger for the external perimeter. Explosions rang through the forest. Marlo stepped out into chaos. Flames licked the walls. She found Thatcher, bleeding but conscious, pulling Cassandra towards the SUV. Go! He shouted. Get out of here! I can't leave you, she screamed. This doesn't end if you die. It ends because you live, he roared. Bishop returned, blood on his jaws, limping. Marlo grabbed the dog's collar and ran, behind her. Micah raised a hand in farewell and then pressed a button on a small device in his hand. The cabin exploded inward. Heat and smoke consumed everything. Marlo didn't look back. She drove through the burning trees, down the ice-slicked road, gripping the wheel with one hand and Bishop's paw with the other. Her eyes were red. Her heart was fire. In her belly, the baby kicked, not in fear, in affirmation. They were still alive. They had sent the truth, and the voices that never died now. The world would hear them all, the morning after the fire. The world awoke to noise it had long forgotten how to process truth. Screens across every continent lit up with flashes of suppressed data, decrypted archives. Images of gray-lit laboratories, clips of screaming test subjects, fragmented voice logs of operatives coldly discussing cognitive manipulation, files stamped with the seal of Project Helix, and a list of names never meant to be spoken again. Public servers crashed under the flood. News networks scrambled to verify, to retract, to spin, but it was too late. What had been buried had clawed its way to the surface, not as rumor, not as conspiracy, but as undeniable fact. Rayon's name, once erased, was spoken aloud. Micah Lenning's name was restored from obsolescence. And the video of a young woman's voice reading aloud the words of her dead father, "Memory is not property, and I was not made to be overwritten," spread faster than any bullet ever fired. But by then, Marlo was gone, disappeared like a ghost into the folds of the western mountains, where snow buried roads and silence swallowed signal. No one knew where she had gone. Only one person knew where to begin looking. Thatcher Malone stood on the hill above the red, hollow ruins, his left arm in a brace, Bishop sitting beside him, still and scarred. Cassandra was alive but in recovery, hidden under federal protection until the heat cooled. The files Marlo had sent had done more than expose a program. They had destabilized entire chains of command. Whistleblowers began to appear, retired colonels, quietly compensated doctors, even a former vice consultant to the Department of Defense, and all of them suddenly remembering what they had signed, what they had buried, and what they had told themselves never to speak of again. Thatcher said nothing during the televised hearings. He wasn't there to speak. He was there to watch, to wait. He knew Marlo wouldn't be seen again until she wanted to be, until the next phase. And that day came 2 years later. It began with a knock on his door, not a forceful knock, not a panicked one, just 3 slow, even taps. When he opened it, Bishop was already there, tail wagging once. She stood on the porch, wearing a hooded coat, snow in her hair, and a child in her arms no longer unborn. The boy looked up at him with eyes so familiar they stole Thatcher's breath, not because he resembled a Hollis, but because when the child blinked, it was like watching generations echo inside a single soul. "You should come in," Thatcher said quietly. "He remembers you," Marlo whispered as she stepped inside. "He remembers all of it." The boy, no older than 2, walked with careful steps once inside. He approached Bishop first, crouched, placed a tiny hand on the dog's muzzle, and said, "I'm sorry about the fire." Thatcher's breath caught. Bishop licked the boy's hand once, then sat still. "What? What did he say?" "He dreams in voices," Marlo said. "Sometimes he wakes up crying in German. Sometimes he sings songs no one taught him. He talks to people I can't see, but I know they were real. They're the ones we saved." Thatcher lowered himself to the couch slowly, not taking his eyes off the boy. "What does he know more than I want him to? Less than they would have forced him to? Is he stable more than I am?" she said with a weary smile. "He has their memories, but not their pain. Maybe because he wasn't created in a lab. Maybe because I loved him from the beginning. Maybe because we gave him a choice before anyone tried to take one away." The boy had picked up a small wooden block from the floor. He stared at it for a moment, then whispered, "A memory is only real if it makes you feel something." Marlo sighed. "He says things like that." Then he asked to watch cartoons 5 minutes later. "He's still a kid, but he's also something else. Have you named him Elias?" she said. After, after the man my mother loved in one of the dreams. He died in a compound fire, trying to smuggle out tapes of Helix. She never got to meet him in real life, but she remembered him more clearly than her own father. I thought, maybe this would be a way to let that memory live without hurting anyone anymore. Thatcher nodded, slowly. "So why now? Why come back?" Marlo looked out the window, snow falling in fine threads against the glass, because the world didn't change the way we hoped it would. The files shocked people. Yes, but Rayon didn't die. It just evolved. Quietly, new names, new funding, and now there are whispers of a second generation. They're not trying to copy memories this time. They're trying to control them, rewrite them, like programming empathy or erasing guilt. They want soldiers who don't break, agents who don't remember the things they do, and they're using the same framework. Helix 2.0, Thatcher muttered. Worse, smarter, legal. She turned back to him. "I want Elias to grow up in a world where remembering something painful isn't a liability, where the truth matters more than obedience, where ghosts don't have to die to be heard." The boy had wandered to the bookshelf and was now pulling down an old field journal. He opened it, flipping pages with clumsy but deliberate hands. Then he said, "This is the page where the doctor said the pain was acceptable if the memory survived. But he cried after writing it." Marlo froze. So did Thatcher. The boy pointed to a corner of the page one Thatcher had never even noticed before. Barely visible under the ink was a faint smudge. Water. A teardrop. "He's right," Thatcher said softly. "That's real. He doesn't forget anything." Marlo whispered. "Not just the facts, the feelings, the context. It's all embedded. What do you want to do with him? Teach him to choose which memories he holds on to and which ones he lets go. And what about the world we keep watching? We keep releasing. Not all at once, not like before. Piece by piece, just enough that they never get to erase again." The boy turned to them and smiled. "You're remembering now, too." Bishop stood, tail wagging, eyes on Elias. Marlo reached down and took her son's hand. "He wanted to see you first, because you didn't run, because you let the truth in, because even when the ghost screamed, you listened." Thatcher stood slowly and knelt before the boy. "What are you going to do with all those memories?" Elias, the boy leaned forward, whispered something only he could hear. And Thatcher, eyes wet, nodded once. Outside, the storm had cleared. A single track of prints led away from the cabin, fading into the morning light. The child who remembered everything had arrived, and the world, for once, might remember him back.